Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody zooming in from all over the world. We know that we've got nearly 500 participants registered, so that's really fantastic. Welcome to the very first online Women in Science Film Festival to be organized by the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World, otherwise known as OWSD, in partnership with the International Science Council, otherwise known as ISC, on this very special day, which today is, as you all know, the International Day of Women and Girls in Science. And what better way to celebrate the fantastic work that women scientists around the world are doing than by showing you some fantastic films that have been made. So this idea for this festival is to celebrate the stories and the contributions of women. And we have gathered together 10 new short films, which some of you may have already seen on the special website page that I think Erin might put the link up in the chat if she's able to do that. For the actual page, you can go there and you can see all of the films. But today, in this hour and 15 minutes, we're going to show you just 3 films. And then we're going to have a discussion about the films afterwards, a panel. And I'll introduce you to the panel members in just a second. And I'll tell you a bit more also about the 2 different projects around these films. So let's just introduce you to the people in the room then. So first of all, I'm Tonya Blowers. I'm the coordinator of the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World. I'm originally from the UK, but I find myself now in Italy, in Trieste, where the OWSD headquarters are. And I'm handing over to Erin Johnson in communications.
Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Johnson. As Tonya said, I work as a communications officer for OWSD, and I'll be screening the videos for you today.
Thanks, Erin. We're relying on you. That's a tough job. And over to Nicole Leghissa, who's also here in Trieste, Italy with us, and she's the OWSD video consultant. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nicole Leghissa. I'm a filmmaker and documentary director. I'm based in Trieste, but I traveled all over the world for telling stories of scientists and women scientists for an international organization. And since 2 years, I do collaborate with the OWSD in designing and supervising this project of visions, and you will see one of the movies created through the program later.
Thank you, Nicole. We can't wait. And working with Nicole is wonderful Sudin, who is calling us all the way from Nepal, where it's quite late, I think, for you, Sudin. Hi. Are you there, Sudin? We seem to have lost Sudin. Well, while we're trying to find Sudin.
Tonya, hi. Sorry, my internet's a bit slow. Namaste, everyone. Hi, I am Sudin Bajracharya from Nepal. I'm a filmmaker, and I've been working with Nicole to produce a documentary about a scientist that will screen very soon, and I'm really excited to be here. And welcome, everyone.
Thank you so much, Sudin. And now I'm handing over to Nick Perkins, who's our partner in crime on this project, heading up the ISC consultancy. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Tonya, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, actually, to everybody who's joining us. Very excited about our panel today. So my name is Nick Ishmael-Perkins, and I'm the senior consultant here at the International Science Council, working on a project that we call the Public Value of Science. And as part of that program, we have co-produced a series called Unlocking Science, which I'll talk about a bit more. I just want to say a word quickly about the International Science Council, because I don't know that everybody will be familiar with who we are or what we do, but the Science Council is effectively a membership body and consists of just over 200 scientific and disciplinary unions and research councils from around the world, and we support policy for science and the promotion of science as a global public good. And I will explain, as I say, why the work that we have been doing with OWSD has been so important to our mission. But I want to now take a moment to introduce you to a very, I would say, respected professional and a very dear friend of mine, Megan Lloyd-Laney. Megan, do you want to say a bit about your experience?
Sure. You need to unmute, Megan. We can't hear you, Megan.
Able to. Okay,
Yeah,
can you hear me now? Right, yes. I've only been doing this for 2 years, haven't I, on Zoom? Apologies. My name is Megan Lloyd-Laney. I am director of CommsConsult, which is a consultancy company based in Zimbabwe and the west of the UK in Cornwall. And I started life as a science journalist, and now our company works in helping people tell stories about their research, about their evidence, helps decision makers use evidence more meaningfully, helps to evaluate the power of storytelling and research on policy and practice. So we kind of work across the value chain. I'm old and I've been doing it for a long time, but I'm super excited about all of these people joining to look at the power of storytelling, right? Because it's the most fun part of communication. So thanks for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Megan. We're very privileged to have you here and really interested to listen to your insights. And just to say, another couple of people that are in the room that you won't be seeing, there's Antonio Coppola. You can see his name up there. He's helping make sure that nothing goes wrong technically. And we also have Xenia, who contributed a great deal to the, hi Nino, to all of the website pages and helped to get the whole dissemination of this event off the ground. So thank you very much, Xenia. So we're coming now to the films, which is really exciting. As I said, we're going to see 3 films, and then we're going to have the panel. And on the panel, we'll have Megan, Nick, Sudin, and Nicole, who will be thinking about, you know, how these films work, how effective they are at telling the stories of women scientists. And we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. You can write in the chat as we go along. We'll try and answer things. We can see the chat. Sometimes maybe Erin might tell us that there's a question that we've missed, but please do feel free to interact. There'll be at least 15 minutes at the end for you to do that. And we also recommend that you put the view onto speaker, because then you'll see the films much better. If you're having trouble seeing, yeah, you can write that in the chat as well, but we hope that this will come across very clearly. So the very first film that we're going to see is a film that is particularly close to my heart, at least. It's a film that, so I think Nick will explain a bit more about the Unlocking Science series, but what I can say from O's point of view is that we entered this kind of competition that Nick was organizing with the ISC, and we thought that this story of Elizabeth Banderson from Malawi was a really compelling story, and so we suggested that she might be somebody that the BBC would want to film, and they agreed with us. And they made this film, which is only 7 minutes long. And I won't say anything more about the film, I think, because it really speaks for itself, except to say that Elizabeth is well known to us. She's an early career fellow. So the Organization for Women in Science for the Developing World, we have various programs which are aimed at supporting women to do science in countries where it's extraordinarily difficult normally to do science as a woman. And Malawi is one of those countries. And we have PhD fellowships, but we also have these very prestigious early career fellowships, which we only give to outstanding women scientists, and we only give 20 per year. And Elizabeth received one of these fellowships. So without more ado, I will pass you over to Erin, who will share the screen and show you the film.
I see a reflection of my dad a lot because he also has a gap tooth like I do. So we were very close. It started with my dad wanting to make a difference in people's lives and helping people. That's the whole motivation. So after I lost my dad, I wanted to do something different to make sure that people don't lose their loved ones the way I did. Not being exposed to anything that would be harmful to their lives, knowing that my dad died from chemical exposures because of the kind of work that he was doing. So I was so desperate to try to save lives, maybe in a hospital, but then I realized there's a bigger way I could do it by maybe helping people eat safer food, live in a safer environment. And that's the whole motivation of my science. I just want people to live in a better world. My mother tells me that I was a very curious child. And the most important question I always ask myself is why? Do things happen the way they do? So it's not easy, I would say, to be a woman, a young girl in Malawi, because you're exposed to a lot of challenges. Most girls get married so early. And I also think that because of the way our society handles girls, some of them have issues with confidence at school. They would find it okay to fail and not to do other things simply because they're girls. The expectations on the young girls are quite lower than they would be on a young man. Expectations as into how far you can go, expectations as into what kind of jobs you can take, what kind of careers you can pick. It was probably sitting on a leaf and became one of the things that I had to catch. So we got a grasshopper. I'm gonna go ahead and put this in the jar. I am what I am today because I had mentors. They saw the potential that I had and tried to nurture that and help me grow in it. They kept on pushing me and say, although no one has ever done it in the country, but you can still do it. In the test system, which is the gustatory system, when the insect touches the surfaces that have been treated, I wanted to look at one of the most important things that Malawi relies on, that's agriculture. The pesticides we spray on our crops, we actually eat them directly. You can see here a cabbage plant that is almost not palatable for someone to buy and eat. So this happens quite a lot to a lot of farmers who do not have an idea on how they can control the pests in the field. So they end up losing much of their crop, and that's a threat to their livelihood as farmers. We are always competing with insects. Could it be possible that I could also explore the sense of smell in insects and how can it be used in agriculture to reduce the toxins? You don't actually need all that chemical to spray it on your crop. Small concentration would actually steer or move insects away from your crops without killing them. So my inspiration came in to reduce the chemical exposure, and we leave the environment as stable as it's supposed to be. How has Organization for Women in Science in the developing world helped me? The first thing is they helped me stay in my country and do the science I wanted in my country without needing to travel abroad to do it. And more importantly, they have exposed me to networks I never imagined I would have. We also have established the Academy of Sciences in Malawi. I think Malawi is rich with scientists, but we are richer when we're well connected with the world. The whole reason is to bring passionate scientists together, boost their confidence that we can do this thing, but more importantly, provide evidence-based advice to the government that is independent and very objective, that would help the people and also move the country's development forward. I think for me, mentoring is not just a duty, but it's a moral obligation that I need to help someone become a better version of themselves. Even if they don't choose to become entomologists, but at whatever they do, they need to do it the best. So when you're looking at the olfactory system, you're actually taking... I'm looking forward to a generation of the next scientists who will dare the odds to do the impossible things and not be afraid to explore unfamiliar fields of science. I would be very proud of myself that maybe my dad would be happy that I've done something that could help people live a better life.
Thanks, Erin, for sharing that wonderful film with us. And now we go straight to Nick, who will tell us more about the Storyworks project.
Thank you, Tonya. I wanted to start by saying, actually, we are particularly pleased with that story. We think that Elizabeth's story of her work as a scientist is particularly moving, and it's a really good illustration of how we can humanize the work that scientists do. And it also met our editorial ambitions for the Unlocking Science series. And I'm going to explain a little bit now about the Unlocking Science series and where the idea came from, but it is worth saying that that film was also selected actually by UNESCO. So it is being featured actually today to celebrate International Day of Women and Girls in Science as part of their main stage to Dubai Expo. And again, I think that speaks well of the work that OWSD is doing, of the strength of our collaboration, and of course to the eloquence and power of the sort of work that Elizabeth and her colleagues are practicing. So with the International Science Council back in 2020, started discussions with the BBC Storyworks. And we had this idea that we would produce a hub, which would be a collection of stories around science. And we were trying to do three things essentially with this hub. The first was to kind of capture the interests, some might say the contestation around science that the pandemic had provoked. We felt like actually this was a good moment for science to really take advantage of the way it had captured public imagination and discourse, and to try to effectively articulate, in both senses of the words, a few things that were quite important. And the second thing that we wanted to do, and this kind of relates to this first point, was actually to showcase stories of science contributing to sustainable transformation, is how we think about it at ISC. And so we were really keen that we would draw from across a range of disciplines, life sciences, natural sciences, and social sciences, to demonstrate how science was actually making a contribution to a more sustainable world, and leading, sometimes facilitating, even provoking the kind of social and industrial change that might be required around that. And then the third thing is that we want to really challenge some of the ideas about how science is actually practiced. And in particular, what we want to do is to showcase science that was collaborative. So it wasn't actually one Einstein locked away somewhere in a basement for years on end, but that actually science was often a deeply collaborative, iterative process, and was often international. And Elizabeth again talked about that again very eloquently in the film just now. But also to demonstrate that science was not happening in the ivory tower, but actually was very much engaged in the community. And this was a really, really important part of our agenda. We ended up with about 25 stories. Some of them are films, some of them are what we call dynamic articles, and some of them are more traditional articles. And we also have a small series of podcasts called How to Talk About Science. And I think that we actually ended up with it was an embarrassment of riches, because of course there are a lot of really compelling stories of science that met our editorial needs. And then we had to make some choices about the logistics of this and trying to make sure that we had a good balance in terms of geography, discipline, and of course, gender. So the next film I'm going to show you is a slightly different approach to the same thing. And it would be useful to hear from you your thoughts on the extent to which you think it has met that kind of editorial framework. And it features the Mawazo Institute. And this is really the story of an institute told through individuals. I'll leave it at that.
We need to build our scientific enterprise from the get-go as diverse as possible, like pull women in, young people in. It's not enough to say the obvious, that Africa needs science. I think we need to go further and say diverse, energetic, vibrant.
Getting into science as a lady was not easy.
So many African scientists and researchers and innovators are doing so much with so little, and it's incredibly inspiring, that grit, that resilience, that, desire to go after a dream and an idea no matter what the challenges are.
I never thought I'll be where I am today. My name is Peris Auma Ambala Ayani. I am a research scientist. At the same time, I am a PhD student at Kenyatta University. My love for science started when I was very young. I chose to focus on virology because during the time I was growing up, there was this HIV and there was no treatment for HIV. As a scientist, I want to be part of eradicating viral infections in Africa. I'm focusing on zoonotic diseases. In particular, I'm focusing on filoviruses, and this is a group of viruses that cause hemorrhagic fevers. An example, we have Ebola and Marburg.
My name is Melissa Achokalela. I am an interactive designer, an illustrator, and animator. I'm also a lecturer of interactive design at the Technical University of Kenya. I'm also a PhD student at the same institution, and my research explores storytelling using new and emerging technologies, with a particular focus on how new and emerging tools can be used to remediate African works of origin. Something I noticed was that when works of oral storytelling are documented in linear media, you lose that aspect of being immersed in the same space with a live storyteller. And I thought, well, maybe new and emerging tools can actually be used to fill that gap so that we have new story experiences with old works of African origin. My love for storytelling was nurtured when I was quite young. There was a show on television that was called Japan Video Topics, and this was the first time that I saw how people created this kind of moving images, and I thought, well, that looks like something that I could do as well. When I was in high school, the assumption was that to be successful, if you had good grades to study engineering, to become a doctor, why are you throwing away your life just by becoming an artist? Well, there are many opportunities that exist in the arts, and the arts, do not exist in isolation.
African scientists are doing all sorts of cool work, interdisciplinary work, field bending work, and I think we have no idea what will come out of exploratory research necessarily. But then history has shown us the byproducts of this kind of work is crucial and feeds into the innovations of tomorrow. Mawazo is a Kiswahili word that means ideas or thoughts and thinking, and what's really interesting is often this has a negative connotation. So if you're somebody with a lot of mawazo swirling around in your mind, you're brooding, and often women are, very typecasted as kind of brooding. And my co-founder and I and our collaborators were thinking up the name for Mawazo. We loved the idea of taking that word and putting a positive spin on it, that women with ideas is something to be proud of, that having a head full of, thoughts and thinking is actually a positive thing. We have a big focus on science communication, public engagement, policy outreach. These future researchers as future thought leaders are really oriented towards the public sphere, are really sensitized to the idea that your research should have some relevance, some touch point to society at large. I really believe that the work that we do is important and often overlooked. Mawazo Institute is part of a big movement to think about how does homegrown knowledge, homegrown science play a part in the future of Africa.
Mawazo Institute financed the sensitization workshop where I went and I shared the results with the community. I was able to advise the community on aspects on how they can control some of these zoonotic viruses. So basically, Mawazo has had a very big impact to me as an individual and of course to the community where I was conducting the research.
I received support to travel for conferences. So I went for the Africa Computer Human Interaction Conference in Namibia. And this was amazing because, I stopped thinking about my work as only existing in the arts, but existing, amidst other, science-based programs. So like, computer science as well.
When we look at the world, currently right now, we need science. In future, I hope to become a renowned scientist, not just here in Kenya, but all over the world. I want to be this virologist, in case we have outbreaks, I'll be the virologist to come to.
People who have an interest in sciences, it doesn't mean that you can have an interest in other fields as well, in the arts, for example.
For the first time in a long time, we are on a growth trajectory. And if we just invested a little bit more into this ecosystem, it'll be astounding, all of the amazing ideas and innovations that we will see.
Wow, what a fantastic video. And at OWSD, we know the Mawazo Institute very well. And I'm so delighted to discover that having loads of chaos in your brain is a good thing. That's so now I'm delighted to introduce the next film, which is from the OWSD Visions project, which our filmmaker Nicole will tell you all about. And please note that while the first two films have been made by the very professionally, internationally celebrated BBC, and so are of a high professional quality, the next film is also of a very high professional quality, but please bear in mind that it's not the BBC. Over to Nicole.
Yes, so I would like to present you the OWSD Visions program. And the film you are going to see was created through the program. And this is an audiovisual empowerment program in filming and storytelling. How it was born. The idea came out when I couldn't travel anymore, and I couldn't really go by myself with my camera to film the stories of scientists in the global south. So I thought to myself, it's really a pity not to go on telling these stories because they matter, and because these invisible, often invisible scientists really need a space to show what they do, and they need the communities to see that these scientists are working for them, and also for us, the audience in the Western world, we need to know that there are wonderful persons there. So I proposed to OWSD and Tonya, and they accepted with enthusiasm to create this program in which I could guide from a distance filmmakers and OWSD members in creating their own video portraits about scientists, local scientists. So the program is a very flexible one. It lasts months, and we work together in storytelling, how to film, how to edit, and how to create a shot list, how to make an interview. And then according to the level of the trainee, he or she can edit, or we edit in Trieste the video. But for sure, they got to the point to film everything. And with the Sudin, Bajracharya, you will see his film about Pragativa Pande. She's a chemist and biotechnologist from Nepal. It was a very fruitful process because Sudin is a very good filmmaker. So he really edited his own film. And we worked together more on the structure, on the story of the film. And I think the idea behind those visions is really to create a network of local filmmakers that can tell their own stories about science and scientists, And according to my approach, which is a human approach, as Nick said, I think the important is to find a key to make science stories not only informative and educational, but even emotional. And really people from developing countries, scientists from developing countries are really working for their own communities. So all these stories are very touching for me, and they matter. So please enjoy this film from Sudin, and let's talk later.
Namaste, I'm Pragativa Pande. I'm a researcher and a science entrepreneur. I did my PhD in chemistry and nanotechnology from Northwestern University in the US. And currently I am focused on doing research on value addition of medicinal and aromatic plants of Nepal. After the devastating earthquake in Nepal in 2015, my husband and I decided to come back to Nepal sooner than later to start experimenting innovation and sciences in Nepal and see what can be done. Food waste is an alarming global issue where 1/3 of the food is wasted worldwide. Fruits and vegetables account for 45% of that waste. Looking at the context of Nepal, 37% of the total fruit production is shared by citrus fruits, and at least 10 to 15% of that citrus fruit is wasted. Most of the citrus fruit waste are dumped in landfill as well as in water resources, which creates huge environmental issue related to greenhouse emissions, which causes health issues for people. It doesn't only have health implications, but also has environmental, economic, and food security issue due to citrus fruit waste. Through OWSD funded Early Career Fellowship, my plan is to add value to the waste from citrus fruits, specifically orange and lime, by extracting highly valuable bioactives, which is therapeutically active chemicals, to have their uses in pharmaceutical industry, nutraceutical industry, and also cosmetic industries. Currently, we are sampling fruits waste from Kathmandu Valley, from fruit vendors as well as farmers. We're also collecting fruits and waste products from Palpa, Gulmi and Rupandehi, which are at different geographical regions and elevations, to look at the impact of geographical conditions on the expression of bioactives in these waste products. Science and technology is not prioritized in Nepal, and there is only less than 0.3% budget allocated for science and technology. To ensure there is higher research budget as well as priority given to emerging technology, a lot of us are directly involved in policy making processes as well. As one of the council members for STI implementation plan, we have ensured 3 key changes in the implementation plan. First is to increase the budget to at least 1% for science and technology, to incorporate gender lens and inclusive innovation in the process, and also to have provisions to accelerate emerging technology, especially in the advent of 4th industrial revolution. So this is my break time, so just a minute, I'll call my daughter. She's with the nanny who's supported by OWSD funded project as well. When I travel, I hire her, or when I'm in lab, I hire her. At RIB, we make sure that there is good distribution of male and female researchers. We also give opportunities for women in decision-making roles, as well as we are changing the HR policies to make it more conducive for women to grow in the field of science and technology. After I received Early Career Fellowship, my legitimacy, visibility, and formal authority in research, in entrepreneurial sphere, as well as to make meaningful changes in the policy document by being involved with the government. Conventionally in extraction, tedious processes like toxic solvents and high temperatures are used, which is in fact even more harmful than trying to value add to the waste products. In our proposed green method, we are proposing to use non-toxic solvents like water and ethanol, which are also low cost and readily available at room temperature, so that we're not using high energy to add value to waste products for economic gain, as well as to alleviate the environmental issues associated with it. I chose this research project specifically because it fits really well in the context of Nepal, where we have huge waste problem and haven't been really doing value addition of any kind in plants, especially for scale up. So there's a huge potential for scale up of this research. It's a low cost technology, green technology, which is readily accessible in Nepal, and also it can have huge economic impact for the country, as well as all the stakeholders involved in the fruits and vegetable value chain in Nepal. This project can also be implemented not just for citrus fruits, but with small interventions we can use this outcome for other fruits and vegetables as well as medicinal plants in Nepal. What drives me to embark on the continuous scientific journey is seeing the possibility of leveraging science and technology to accelerate the prosperity of the country. I find it very fulfilling that I am involved in the process of creating a leveled playing field for both males and females to embark on this scientific journey that I have gotten into as well. For me, science is not just about what it can do today, but how it will shape the type of just and prosperous world that I would like our future generations to thrive in. And that is why I love doing what I do.
Thank you, Erin, for showing those films, and thank you, everybody, for watching. We're seeing all of your fantastic messages as they're coming in. Many of you have been inspired by these films. I'm recognizing lots and lots of you out there, so it's great to see all these OWSD members, OWSD fellows participating. Yeah, we are so proud of the filmmakers and the protagonists of the films and of our partnerships. It's really, really exciting. So I'm now we're gonna now have the panel discussion. So we have our panelists. We have Sudin, who was the filmmaker on the last film that you just saw. We have Nicole, who, as you saw, created the OWSD Visions project. We have Megan, who's going to give a kind of meta-analysis, I think, of the projects, and we have Nick, who will have insightful conclusions, I'm sure, to tell us about. So I'm going to go over now to Sudin and ask him how it was. What was the experience like, Sudin, working on this film? And you were one of the few filmmakers I know from speaking with Nicole who already had some experience of making films, right? But you've also told us that it was a big learning experience for you. Would you like to talk a bit about that and even the technical process, if you like?
Sure, thank you, Tonya. So I had some experience of producing documentaries, filming documentaries before, but I was kind of like a run and gun filmmaker. Like I usually didn't plan for anything. I used to just take my camera and just go and film, and I used to just wish that okay, everything goes as I thought it would, and sometimes the story wouldn't come up. But during this process, while filming Dr. Prativa's documentary. I think this is the first time I ever made a proper planning, and thanks to Nicole and thanks to OWSD team, that I learned how it is important for us filmmakers to have everything planned before actually going to film. This time it was very different. Filming the story was very challenging. First, it was a scientific story. It has science in it, but again, she has personal stories as well as stories of struggle, and it was very challenging for me to decide how to tell her story in a very short period of time, in like 7 minutes. So Nicole, I had a lot of discussions with Nicole, and then she showed me how I can structure the story into different parts, and then think of ways I can tell the stories through script writing. So it was very challenging at first. It was very difficult at first, but as we began writing scripts and planning the shots and everything, it was the work became really easy, and I really had fun filming Dr. Prativa's story, which is a very inspirational story. I've known Dr. Prativa for, I think, 4 years, but while filming this, I got to learn more challenges that she had faced through her career that I assumed she didn't have to face. But yeah, and I'm really thankful for this mentorship.
Sudin, when we were talking earlier, you mentioned that yes, when you're talking about the challenges that Dr. Pande was facing, and you were really aware that a man would not have been facing those same challenges. Would you like to tell us something about that? I think there's a strong delay, and I don't think that Sudin has heard me. So I'm going to pass now over to Nicole, and then we can come back to Sudin to talk about how he found Prativa's career so inspiring. So Nicole, would you like to tell us something about why you think it's so important to film in the local context?
I think that the idea with those visions was really to create a connection between OWSD national chapters, which are groups of scientists, members and related to OWSD, with the local filmmaker and communicators, so that that person could become really a point of reference to tell stories, not only one story, which is the first one we do together, but then to be really a person to rely on to communicate their own science. So I think there are very good filmmakers in every countries, and the thing with science is that it is a bit tricky to tell science in an interesting way. So I think it could be a plus if I pass on my experience in science, audiovisual storytelling, but the local filmmakers, and use it to really have his own narration about their science and their scientists. I think this is the main, so two things. One is the connection and continuity, to give to scientists, to have a person to refer to create at a low cost in a sustainable way, to create stories. And then the other thing is to have their own narration about science and scientists locally. I hope I answered.
Nicole. Yeah, exactly, because as we've discussed many times, you know, people may think that when they see these documentaries, they're quite slick. It seems pretty obvious what the story must be. You know, there's a woman doing science. All you've got to do is film her, and then you've got the story. But actually, where you decide to film the scientists, what's the beginning of the story, what's the end of the story, what's the focus of the story, these are all decisions, and they change the story dramatically. And I can see in the chat lots of comments to Sudin actually about, somebody said, Sudin, you filmed with a perfect scene, putting a scientist and family women. And that was a choice that Sudin made to film Pragativa in that family environment. Sudin, you're back now online. Would you like to say something? You got cut off before, you were frozen.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my laptop froze. So I've known Dr. Pragativa for I think 4 or 5 years, and she is very talented, and she is, I think, one of the most academic person that I've met yet. She is a scientist as well, and I assume that it must have been easy for her in Nepal, because we don't have many scientists in Nepal, and especially women scientists. So I thought it must be easy for her to be doing what she is doing. But as we started filming, and as I started hearing about all of the challenges that she had to face, and because being a woman, I think I didn't know that even someone like her would be questioned about her legitimacy and credibility just because she is a woman. She has all the credibility. She has a PhD degree. She is a scientist. She has studied abroad, and she has worked for multinational companies before. But yet, when she came to Nepal and when she wanted to bring change here using her skills, I assumed it must have been easy for her, but the story was totally different. And yeah, this, while filming, I actually saw like it really is difficult. So I'm glad that I could be part of this, and we could tell this story, because I think Dr. Pragativa's story must be told, and stories of other scientists, other women in science also must be told, because it is very inspiring, and it is very inspiring to see them face all of these challenges and yet not give up and continue what they are doing. So I'm really glad to be part of this.
Thank you so much, Sudin, and we're really, really so glad that you've been such an enthusiastic and fantastic participant in the OWSD Visions. And there's lots of comments in the chat about how important it is to have support from partners and from men as a woman, because men very often, because of the way the world is structured, are kind of door openers or gate holders. And when you have men on your side, of course, it makes life a lot easier. So we really celebrate you being here, Sudin, and we thank you so much for this wonderful film that you've made together with Nicole. And now I'm going to go over to Megan, who has been watching and listening very intently. And Megan, we'd like perhaps to ask you maybe to think about these two kinds of different filmmaking projects, and if you have any thoughts on that, and on storytelling, the importance of storytelling in general.
Great, thanks very much. They were amazing. I mean, and I'm watching the comments, and that's, you know, asking why storytelling works. And the comments tell us why it works, because people are finding parallels, right? It resonates with people's own positions. It speaks of the passion they have about science. It reflects their kind of challenges about, yes, you know, big thumbs up to Paris's husband, because actually being a good scientist when you're also a family means you need support from partners. So storytelling is an amazing construct to inspiring people to be excellent scientists, to communicating science, to communicating the results of science. And it's just a great instrument. And there's science, right, around why storytelling works. And it works because there's so many different entry points. You can talk about the scientist, an amazing, passionate person. You can talk about the science, right? the frontiers of things that we know we don't know. That's every child's dream of why, mum, why, dad. Science will tell us the answer. So that's another entry point. The entry point about how we approach investigating stuff, how we solve the problem on the landfill site. So all of those places for storytellers are entry points. You can start with any one of those, and there is power in how you choose to frame, right? So as an outsider, all these brilliant filmmakers can choose to tell that story in a particular way, and can choose to put the person telling the story in the front seat or just as part of that story. And that's often the power and the challenge of storytelling, is that you can take power away from the person whose story it is, but you can also give power to the storyteller. And I think that's profoundly important. So all of those, looking at the very different stories and the ways they were told, and all of them speak in a particular way. There's no silver bullet in how you tell a story that will resonate and have the desired impact with everyone all of the time. So it's also about the choice of what stories speak to you, and understanding that we can tell stories in different ways, and we must be meaningful and purposeful in what we want the audience to think and know, right? Maybe we're just trying to impart information. Maybe we're trying to show them that there is an alternative future. Maybe we want to show them what they could be as children, young girls, young boys. They could have a career in science, even though they exist in Malawi, where there's 0.3% of funding spent on science. You know, those kind of things. Maybe you can show people a vision of what they could be, so you can inspire. And the evidence of what works with science and storytelling, it reflects those things, right? So be a good storyteller, be understanding what the audience wants to know and what will resonate with their lives, and be an honest and ethical storyteller in handing the baton to the person whose story it is, and making sure that it's framed in a way that they feel comfortable. So many things to say. Luckily, I'm only one person on the panel, but I do think that there is a profundity in the crafting of storytelling, which is powerful. We are told stories when we sit on our parents' knees, right? And they will start with, you know, a long time ago, once upon a time in a land far away, and they've got us. And then you can craft, you know, someone said, stories are data with a soul. So if you are a good storyteller, you can take the most kind of beige facts that people wouldn't ordinarily listen to and craft them in a story, and you've got them, and they will repeat it, because we repeat stories. So alchemy, over. Nick, take the baton.
Wow, Megan, thank you so much. So many really interesting comments there, which I'm sure Nick can't wait to take up. Over to you, Nick.
No, I was laughing at the data with a soul metaphor, which I definitely will remember and will repeat like a good story. No, I mean, I think it's lovely. I really, you know, commend Sudin and Nicole for the films. I've watched a couple of them that are on the page. Again, I encourage people to go and check out the curated films for the online festival. I think actually, there are two things I want to make as an observation. Just kind of picking up on something that both Nicole and Megan referred to. When we were selecting, so we had basically BBC Storyworks and ISC. We had almost 200 ideas submitted to us from, you know, around the world. And we were looking for two things, really. One is that we wanted to have a science project that was more than just somebody's idea. So as I said, it had to be something that had some kind of encounter with community, which we could then film. But we also were looking for an individual that could drive this science story, that would give it meaning and that would engage you. And as I said before, I think Elizabeth, the OWSD story is a really good example of that. And the reason why we were looking for these two things was, one of them is that actually, having a good individual to speak to the story is important, because actually you feel emotionally connected. But also, one of the things that the BBC Storyworks are really keen on is this idea of what they call solution-focused journalism. And what that means is that you have a very clear issue that you're going to explore, that you're going to think about the issue in terms of, okay, what can you share as a lesson for other people to hear about the issue? And that you might also talk a little bit about some of the limitations of that particular solution that you're presenting. And this is very important for the science bit, right? Because what we were trying to do effectively was to balance a compelling narrative about an individual with a story of an idea that could have and had demonstrable impact somehow. And for that bit, there was obviously, you kind of go through, there's a whole process that we went through in terms of treatments and so on. But we also crucially had peer reviewers for the films, so that once we had a draft, we would then circulate that to at least 2 peer reviewers. And the peer reviewers had very simple questions they had to follow, not about the stylistic choices that were made in the film, but about the substance of the science and the extent to which it felt like it was substantiated. And that was for us really, really important. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Nick. I just want to pick up on that last comment that you've made, actually, because something that happens to women scientists is that they are very often invited to talk about being women and not about the science that they do. So you very, very often will have panels which are, women in science panels. And actually, you need talented social scientists who work on women and gender issues to talk about women in science, right? It's a complex subject. Just because you're a woman and a scientist does not mean you're an expert on all of the issues surrounding women in science. And it absolutely does not mean that that's all you ever want to be invited to talk about. And so one of the things that we've found challenging, and one of the things that we really, really always try very hard to stick to, is we always ask ourselves, no matter how great the story is, we still must insist on the science. The science is the heart of the story for us, right? And what we're trying to grasp is, these women that we've selected to have these fellowships, they've been selected not because they're photogenic, not because they've got great husbands, not because they're pregnant and that looks good on film. They've been selected because they have adhered to a very strong set of evaluations around their science. And there has been an enormous selection process for them to be awarded these fellowships, like 20 women per year. And so it's crucial that we don't lose that aspect, that and that's, I think, one of the big challenges of all science communication is, how do you convey to a general, interested, engaged and intelligent public what are very sophisticated issues. So, for example, in Elizabeth's story, the equipment that she was given through the OWSD fellowship is extremely sophisticated. It's a piece of equipment that it's a sensor for insects, so you can tell what insects are smelling through electronic waves, right? I'm not a scientist, I'm a social scientist. That's what I understand about this sophisticated machine. It involves nanotechnology, it involves, all kinds of highly sophisticated aspects. But somehow or other you have to convey the impact and the use of that sophistication. Do you see what I mean? It's this balance that I think is really interesting and crucial. So I'm going to now pass back to anybody on the panel who might want to say something more. I've noticed that there is a specific question in the Q&A here, which somebody might want to pick up on. It says, it's from Shotil Trujillo, sorry about my pronunciation. Congratulations for these videos. what are the challenges we need to improve increasing scientific vocations? So I think this question means, you know, how do we get, why is it challenging to get people interested in science, perhaps? So if anybody wants to answer that question or any of the questions that you've seen coming up in the chat, perhaps you could raise your hand on the panel and we'll, Nick, over to you.
So I wanted to start by just reflecting on the point that you were making just now about not having women scientists just to speak about their gender as opposed to their science, because actually that's it's, you know, what you call the kind of the devaluing of the exceptional, because it's kind of like, oh look, you're exceptional, talk about how exceptional you are, as opposed to, you know, let's take you seriously. And in that regard, with this Unlocking Science series, what we wanted was a balance of gender across the stories, you know. So the scientists that were featured were women as well as men. And what you will see across those 25 odd stories is that actually, you know, obviously not all of these women are talking about themselves as women. They're talking about different aspects of their identity, as with all of the scientists, or of their community in terms of their motivations and so on. And they're also talking, of course, substantively about their science. But crucially, we also have, amongst the peer reviewers that I referred to, we also went to make sure that we had gender balance, so that you had the peer reviewers were women as well as men. And again, the gender specialists within that peer review group were not necessarily, we had one woman who was a gender specialist, but we also had two men. And so we didn't want, again, to feel like, actually, oh, if it's a story that has a woman in it, it needs to go to a woman to be peer reviewed. Or if they talk about gender, it has to be a woman that peer reviews it, or something like that. So I think that's really important. What I was going to say on that question about actually the, you know, increasing the attractiveness of science as a vocation for women in particular, I think a big issue is about representation and identification. So actually seeing what you can be is really important. And this is, again, why we wanted to sort of challenge the idea of who scientists are with the Unlocking Science series.
Thanks, Nick. And I think that that's the crucial thing about role models, obviously, is what comes across in these films. And I think that's what's coming across very much in the chat. And that's part of storytelling too. So I wonder if anybody else would like to comment on those things.
Can I just come in and quickly say that I think it's about understanding the kind of impediments for women going into science, right? So you can do things through formal schooling. You can do things around visioning. So you bring to them images of women who are like them, who have done that difficult journey and some of the challenges they face. So you can kind of showcase that so people see what they could be, and that it's not an easy journey, but it's possible. But I also think it's being quite practical, right, about the impediments to being a woman who has a career in science. And it's about getting support for childcare, right? It's about having a fund that funds your nanny to go on a conference with you, and having people who have flexible working, so that actually when you have that nightmare time where your brain has gone to mush because all you're doing is, being a kind of carer, is actually having flexible working so that you can be productive to your own timetable. And that requires employers and legislation. So it's kind of from the outside in, understanding what the challenges are to pursuing a career. It's not just being bright and supporting people to take good exams and giving them opportunities and making the legislation able that women can hold jobs, in high levels of science, and getting rid of discrimination and ceilings. It's also about the very practical impediments that might stop you. And I think that's why the kind of, this move that is very kind of peripheral, but maybe starting to thinking about holistically challenges to certain careers for certain kind of people, require the people who are inside of that, the subject of who's trying to be promoted, to be in there saying, well, actually, here are the 17 reasons why I can't pursue that career in science. And none of them are addressed by that scholarship, because, how long have you got to listen to the story about why I can't even fill out the form that applies for that scholarship? Anyway, it was going to be a short answer, but wasn't.
Thanks, Megan. In fact, I think, sorry, I just wanted to say in response to Megan talking about, you know, what people need in order, what women need specifically in order to continue their careers. I think you would have seen in the film, in Sudin's film, that Pragativa mentions that she received a grant for childcare and babysitting, and that's something that we had to develop at OWSD. It's not easy to do. It's complicated, but it makes a huge difference. I'm looking here as well. There are other questions that have come in, but in the meantime, I was going to go over to Sudin, who had his hand up, and then let's go back over to Nicole, and then we'll try and answer some of the questions in here. Okay, Sudin.
Thank you, Tonya. So yeah, we had to make that creative decision as well while writing the script, to either just tell the story about Dr. Pragativa's research, or have her personal stories come in as well, either to show how supportive Dr. Pragativa's husband has been, and how either to introduce the issues of gender in Nepal or no. We had discussions about this, and later we decided that, okay, I think it is important to have these stories included in our documentary as well, because we felt like it's not only about the scientific challenges that Dr. Pragativa is tackling and solving, but also she and her family can be a model for everyone else. And we took that decision, and we showed personal stories from Dr. Pragativa's family as well. And while doing so, we also decided to bring in the issues regarding gender in Nepal. And I think it happens in other countries as well, not only in Nepal. But we felt that, okay, I think we have to address this part as well, because that is also the challenge that she and other women in science are facing. So yeah, we have to take that decision.
Thank you, Sudin. Nicole, I'm sure you have something to add.
Yeah, it's a very short comment about what Sudin already said. It was really a participatory work, like the script. So when it was the case of deciding what we insert about Pragativa's story as a woman, the relationship with the husband, the support, in this case of the husband, who is really permitting her to do her job. Actually, you see it's in the very first scene. And then the fact of being able to call her daughter on the phone while she is with the babysitter. This was all decided, the three of us together, the scientist, Sudin, and me. And I think in this sense, it's a very, I don't know, democratic way of telling stories, in the sense we are sharing ideas, we are not imposing anything, we discuss. And I think this is a very concrete and positive result of this discussion. And there was always a balance to keep. Okay, we don't want to talk about a woman who is a scientist, but a scientist who is a woman. So it was really delicate. And yeah, but there was a lot of discussing about this.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm just going to read some of the questions that have come in. There's lots of questions in the Q&A, and some people are also posting them in the chat to try and make sure that we notice. So I'm just going to read out the ones in the Q&A, and then if anybody wants to take up those questions, they can. We have about 5 minutes left. So a question from Chanri Sok is, how can we make women stay on in science, also have a commitment to staying on in science? Salina Banu, OWSD fellow from Bangladesh. Hello, Salina. She says, hi, Nick. Representation of women depends on the willingness of policy and system. How can we improve this from the bottom-up approach? We have Amelia Adam, who says, what do you think about hashtags such as women in STEM or women in science, instead of saying, I'm a scientist, with no gender labels? We have an anonymous attendee saying, how important is it to have a discussion on women in science, focusing a bit, I stress, just a bit less on gender balance and more on women, particularly women doing brilliant things in the field of science in the model world. And final one here, focusing from Nala Al-Bayari, focusing on the spirit of science in these films that were shown is indeed the important axis and not gender. But there are stories of women who have undertaken the field of scientific research in countries under bombardment and destruction and in detention, especially Palestinian women in Gaza. And I firmly believe that there are women scientists in this part of the world who deserve to publish their success stories to the world that emerged from the womb of suffering. Wow, that's a very heartfelt question and comment. So I think I'd like to go quickly over to Megan first to see if she has any response to any of those questions.
Yeah, so I don't have any answers to any of them, sadly, not wise enough or powerful enough. And I think it is about the long view. And as a woman, you know, who's kind of really old and being told from a very young age, it takes time for you to get through that glass ceiling or that glass door, or to have that opportunity to be director of that company, you kind of are impatient. But I do think there is a kind of holding breath and looking at contribution to breaking those glass doors and glass ceilings, and taking a bit of a collaborative approach to it. So we can't all do it individually, but the storytelling, I think, is a collective effort, particularly about, you know, Gaza. I work on a longitudinal study with a research program on empowering adolescent girls in Gaza. And we have done with our rather brilliant storyteller locally, who's done a series of podcasts on girls in refugee camps in some of the really most challenging places of the world, to tell their stories about what their aspirations are. And one of the girls in Gaza wants to be an astronaut, and she is absolutely determined that that's what she's going to do, go to space. And it's about supporting her. So we put her in touch with a guy who is a Palestinian, who actually was the designer of the new robot that went to Mars, who happened to be from Gaza. And so we put them connected to say, he has done it. He came from very difficult circumstances, and he spoke to her on the phone and said, yep, you be determined, you keep on working at school, it's possible, everything is possible. So I think there's a responsibility, right, to do things together, to lift others up. If you have anything, even just a famous friend or somebody who can provide a little bit of inspiration at every juncture, if you have any power, however small. And I think that's a collective effort as storytellers and as scientists, and recognizing that we can't do all of it on our own, and we're not going to get all of it done. So you do what you can, and you do it purposefully, and you do it often, right? Not every day, but most weeks.
Thanks, Megan. You've already had a strong response here from Liz Makwela, who says, very good idea. We're more strong when we are together. And going over to Nicole. Nicole, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, I think that if there are stories about women in science, they become more visible. And visibility means to exist somehow. The idea is to create more and more stories about women in science and spread them around the web. Also, we are, by the way, adding a short training on dissemination with OWSD for the filmmakers and the scientists. So that I think visibility is very much linked with storytelling and stories. So we are made of stories, and we need more stories about women in science. If I answered to the question, how to make.
Absolutely, Nicole, and thanks for mentioning about the dissemination, because that's the other side of this, isn't it? That you can have a fantastic story, you can have a fantastic film, but if nobody sees it, it doesn't go anywhere. And so that's another important element of this whole project, is also training the filmmakers and the producers of the films. What do I do with my film now I have it? Where can it go? Which is a fantastic aspect that you've introduced again, Nicole. So thank you for that. Nick, anything you'd like to add?
So I had two observations. First of all, Hi, Selena. I feel, since you've sort of said hello, I feel a special obligation to reflect on your question, although it is particularly tricky, I think. You know, one of the reasons why this is so tricky is because power, when it is really effective, is almost invisible. And so it's very difficult to challenge, really. But I have a few observations here from discussions around diversity and inclusion, particularly in the field of science, but not exclusively. The first is actually the value of thinking collectively, because I think if we actually look at systems and policies and see ourselves as individuals, it can be especially disempowering. But there is a community out there, and sometimes your community is quite quiet, but the idea of working collectively gives you more power. And so I think that's one thing that's really important. The other thing is actually to recognize that systems and policies exist. Actually, they are internalized. There are people who actually are tasked with reproducing them, and those people in turn are answerable to somebody else. So it's always helpful to think a little bit about, okay, so who is reproducing this? Why are they reproducing this? Who are they answerable to? If it's policy, you know, you think actually, okay, so who, you know, if politicians, I always remember this actually, the chief scientific advisor at the Department of International Development said, you know, people talk about influence in policy all the time, like it's really, really complicated, but actually on a certain level, it's not super complicated. He said, you know, you look at what's the headlines in the newspapers that the politicians read. We see that all the time, and certainly in the context of the UK, and I recognize that this varies depending on the political and cultural context, but the idea is that actually people are often accountable to somebody else or something else. And the third thing I was going to say is actually, yeah, that, you know, there's also this idea of always thinking a little bit about what's possible, right? And kind of I think they call it the Overton window, because sometimes something that seems inconceivable at one period can become actually possible at another period. And so you're always kind of thinking, okay, in the context of where we're at, this kind of shift here, this might be possible. And then you look for those opportunities. Also, Amelia, this question about, you know, should we be just saying I am a scientist? And I think that's a great idea, but I am afraid that the reality is at the moment for a lot of people, scientist is a very gendered profession. So you say, I'm a scientist, and there's still a lot of people who think, okay, well, you must be a man. In fact, they don't even think it. It's unconscious bias, right? They assume that you must be a man. So when you say something like women in science, it gets them to sort of take a moment and think, huh? And that's why I think that hashtag exists. And I think there's still value in it. And I think that if we drop it too quickly, it might reinforce the status quo rather than challenge it, would be my reflection. Anyway, I'll stop.
Thank you, Nick. And that, of course, is the reflection that we at OWSD are reflecting on all the time, because we're the organization for women in science, but we'd like not to exist. We'd like it not to be necessary for us to be here. But right now, of course, it's very important to focus on women and make sure your stories are out there. So I think we have a final comment from Sudin, which seems to me to be entirely appropriate. Sudin, have you got anything that you'd like to say as we finish up this panel session?
Thank you, Tonya. So, like Nick said, and like you said as well, organization for women exists, but this should not be existing now. But still, there are a lot of people, a lot of women who are still struggling. So I think this having hashtags with women in science and telling more stories about these inspiring women is very important in my opinion, because like if we tell more stories about them, if we don't tell stories, then like Nicole said, there won't be any visibility. So I think we should tell more stories like these in the future as well, and yeah, and hope everything will be equal in the future.
Thank you, Sudin, and thanks once again for your support. And I'm sure that your story, you're telling the story of Prativa's wonderful journey, will be extremely influential and impactful for women in science everywhere around the world. So I think with that, we've gone slightly over time, only 5 minutes. We stick to the time because we know that it's very, very hard to stay concentrated online for longer than this. But we have, well, I have so enjoyed all of the discussion, the comments, all of your wonderful, enthusiastic comments in the chat, which is really great. We will take a look at them as well. And please do continue to write to us all if you have any thoughts, if you want to be involved. This is just the beginning of these film telling stories. So I think we can conclude. I would like to conclude that our very first OWSD ISC Film Festival has been a great success, and we are really, really very grateful to you all for staying on board and listening. So I will say goodbye and pass over to each panelist just to say bye, and then we'll close for the day.
Goodbye to everybody.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye. It was a pleasure.
See you all again.
Bye.